Tick tack, it's my clock telling me I should get up. Yeah, I should get up.
Hi, and welcome to The Conscious Loop, where woo-woo and the real world collide. I'm your host, Katrina DeAngelis. Join me as we explore what it looks like to live consciously almost always. Each episode, we dive into transforming mindsets and shifting paradigms through topics such as developing self-awareness, living authentically, communication, strengthening relationships, and leading from the inside out. If you're ready to break out of your unconscious loops and discover what else is possible, you came to the right place. You ready? Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to The Conscious Loop. I'm so excited to dive into today's episode with Lisa. It's actually part 2 of a 2-part series. We sat down to do a recording and there was just so much stuff to go into. So we decided to break it up into 2. Last week was all about forming and accelerating relationships, whereas this week is really about deepening them. And what I loved about this was, it's just so surprising to hear how you can have such transformative conversations and really deep conversations with either new people or people that are already in your life, and how that can completely change the trajectory of your relationship. Just a couple announcements. There is a free resource in the show notes to rewire your unconscious loops with a free meditation and workbook. And I'm also taking on 2 new one-to-one coaching clients as of September. So if you want to get on the waiting list for that and have a free discovery call, link in the show notes as well. All right, let's dive in. Lisa, welcome back. For those of you who missed last week's episode, please go back and listen. We shared a lot about how to accelerate and build deeper relationships. And today we're going to go into deepening those relationships. And so last week there was a lot about, we talked about the mindset and the skill set. And so, you know what, do you want to actually maybe just quickly overview mindset and skill set, and then we can dive into the connection hour activity that you run, that I got to be a part of and experience, which is always so fun. And then we'll dive even deeper into the deeper work that you do post connection hour.
Okay. Well, just to kind of reground everyone, I think the important things, like when you're thinking about authentic connection and really accelerating that, unlocking it, strengthening connection, the mindset is so important. And then it's the conversational skill. And one of the things that you really have to focus on is focusing on the connection, focusing on the connection, not the tension that arises, not what is maybe holding you back from what you think the other person might be thinking about you, or does this person like me, or am I interesting? Like really focusing on how can you be in connection with that person and bring out the best in them, kind of really shine your light and allow for the conversation to just flow, to be really just interesting and enriching. And that's what creates the sense of aliveness that we all feel. And from the ways that the skill set, like the conversation intelligence, that's so important, we really talked about 3 key things in order to enable it. We talked about 1, being genuinely curious and asking better questions. We talked about 2nd was mindfully listening. And the 3rd was really telling better stories and just being courageous to ask the things that you really want to be curious about, so that you can connect on more of an emotional level faster.
Absolutely. And, actually one thing, that last point, the storytelling piece, I was reflecting, just as you were saying that, I was sort of reflecting on the power of even sharing something deeper. So my experience, and we'll dive into the connection hour, but my experience of the connection hour, I found myself, the quality of the conversation was directly correlated to what I was willing to share, or the level of vulnerability that I was willing to go into. I found myself like, okay, I could share this story, but I've shared that 3 times before, or I could share this other story that's actually really coming up that I've never shared before, but it feels present now. And that feels more vulnerable, but at the same time creates a more emotional connection, I think, because when you share something for the first time, it does feel like less rehearsed in a way too, and it feels like it's more raw. That just popped up right now. Let's dive into the connection hour. I would love for people to just get like a sneak peek of what that is that you do. And I know it's something that can be done with groups, with teams, individuals. There's so many ways that you sort of facilitate connection hours. So a little bit about that. And then I hear you go even deeper, which I'm excited to learn more about because I haven't had the pleasure to take part in that experience, but we'll dive into that next so people can form deeper relationships.
Yeah. Well, it was such a joy to have you experience the power of my trademarked experience connection hour. And, the impetus for it and kind of where I got inspired to even just first create it is, there's many thought leaders, of course, that have shared, like Tony Robbins, the quality of our life, and success, really depends on the quality of our relationships. And what I believe is that it's the quality of our conversations that creates the quality of our relationships, and in turn, the quality of our lives and our success, in business and beyond. Right. And so what I have found is that in going to many different events and guiding thousands of people around the world is that there's a very big just kind of like disparity of how people are feeling when they're coming into meeting new people. And some people are like so excited and let's go and like I can't wait to connect, and other people are maybe a little bit more anxious or overwhelmed and feel that it's energy draining to go into these experiences. And so I love being able to help fast track people to form the incredibly powerful, inspiring, uplifting connections that are going to completely change the course of their day, their experience, and then beyond, their month, their year, their life. And I believe that that is the power that one conversation has. And so in that experience, people get to really have more of like a speed bonding type experience. You kind of move very quickly from any sort of transactional networking, which I like to completely turn on its head, into much more authentic connecting. And from that place, I always hear at the end, like, I can't even believe the connection that I just had with this person, right? Or my mindset is completely shifted. Or then fast forward, people will say, that connection that I had and that experience by the end of the event, like that was so memorable. And I'm totally going to go like beyond this experience to have this person like in my life. And it just opens up so much. So I really find that I love guiding people within the experience to be able to kind of unlock that. And I'm kind of curious for you, before we kind of jump into like the deepening part, like what did you really feel, or what did you take away or notice that you maybe might do differently now, within your life, having gone through it?
Yeah, such a good question. And I think I mentioned this last week a little bit too, where no matter how good I think I am, I always realize how much more there is to learn. And it can be something so small and so big, and they have equal impact. One thing I really took away was the power of just shifting a question. So rather than saying, how was your day? What's one thing that inspired you today? Or what's one win of your day? So different, like so different. Even when I ask Sam that question now, because I would ask how your day is going so often that it became like an empty question. And when I shifted to what is a win, or what's something that feels present for you right now, it just completely shifts the conversation to be more intentional and not just a question that you bypass, like, hey, how's it going? Good. Okay, great. That was small but huge. And also just appreciating the setup of an environment that allows for those conversations. And I was experiencing it as an experiencer, like as a person experiencing how to ask deeper questions and forming deeper relationships. And I was also experiencing it as sort of like from higher up above, of like a lot of intention goes into creating spaces and environments that allow those conversations to take place. And that's also something that we can all do when it comes to like having a party, or when it comes to even having a conversation with one person, like a phone call, like a catch up. Like the way we structure things or the way that we think about things has a lot of impact, and I think often goes unnoticed. So I was really like appreciating that, like being part of the experience and having my own experience, but also like witnessing the experience overall.
Totally. I love that. I love that you really took away that, and the level of intentionality that we can all have. And everyone is empowered to completely shift the dialogue wherever they are, whomever they're with. Oftentimes we might go into these different gatherings or events or like a reunion. I remember used to go to different college reunions and and it's kind of like awkward and you're talking to all these different people and you're like staying in the chit chat. And then once I actually studied the art of conversation and how I studied question design and appreciative inquiry, and then fast forward to my business school reunion and it was like a completely different experience. And I am able to really notice that oftentimes you kind of will not, you'll just kind of like let a conversation pass you by. Right. And so you're kind of like dismissing like what is actually, transpiring. And when you do shift it, that you really can do it, in any single moment. And the other thing that you commented on was storytelling and how you kind of notice that, and how you're asking Sam even, different question. And what I find is that, if we're not prompting it in a way that's going to help someone, like not everyone is skilled in these things. So you have to also help someone else, like bring it out of them. So just by shifting the question to not just like, how was your day? And it being kind of like a passive question and just saying, what was a highlight of your day? Or what was a low light of your day? Or tell me a story about a highlight of the day. And you ask it in that way, it's going to help someone else respond in such a more powerful way. And then if you get asked the question that's just a very typical question, like how's your day, then you can actually be empowered to answer it in a way that's actually what was the highlight or low light of my day, instead of rambling, oh, I did this and I did this and I went to this grocery store and I did this. Like, so you have to actually express it in a way that's going to unlock it as well. And that moment by moment, small step by small step is what helps get you closer. And there's always something to learn about someone, no matter how long you have known them. And that's where the deepening really comes in.
Yeah. Wow. And, even I love how what you just said about like, it's not always just you responding to questions or you asking questions. You're an active creator in both of those scenarios. So you can respond to questions intentionally based on what you now know, like based on building that skill set. The other thing as well is like you mentioned opportunities. And I think that's another thing I got out of the session as well, the connection hour, realizing there's so many opportunities to meet new and different people, learn something from somebody, potentially meet like your future best friend, business partner, collaborator, like so many things. And we miss so many of those opportunities because we're not forming relationships. And that was something I always get out of your sessions too. You always just meet interesting people. You can never plan or expect what's going to happen. And you also don't always know where it's going to go, but you don't need to know, right? Like you can have an intention of, I want to meet maybe someone in marketing because I would really love to learn from them. Like you can have that intention, but don't filter everything through that lens, right? Like be open and willing to just learn something new or meet someone new because you never have any clue where it could potentially go.
Absolutely. Like at the base level, any conversation interaction is to gain understanding, understanding that person, and to learn something. And that is honestly what keeps life interesting. And only focus on that being the expectation, then most likely you're going to have an enriching, fulfilling interaction. It's going to move something forward and it is going to just feel really nourishing, for each other, that helps you see them and for them to feel seen. And that's kind of like at the core of why we're really here.
Yeah. To see and be seen. I love that. Okay. So now how do we go deeper? So yeah, I would love to hear more about, once you are, you're there, you've built the skill set, the mindsets around accelerating relationships, and you have those sort of like questions back in your pocket. How do you deepen relationships, whether it's with new people or even with people you've known forever, right? Oftentimes it's family or friends that we don't have those deeper conversations with because they just become very familiar in sort of communicating the same way. So how do you both build deeper relationships? And I would love to hear more about, the activity and exercises that you do with companies and with communities to help facilitate that as well.
Yeah. Well, it's such a big question. I'm like, how do you deepen, right? There's so many different layers to it. But I will maybe just first start, because I think what's also important, contextually is some of the mindset around just your choices to get closer to someone, right? Because we're not meant to connect with everyone at the same level. And it's so important to remember that, so that we're not ever feeling like, oh, why are they not interacting with me a certain way, right? Or it's so much energy to maintain all of these connections, right? And so it is really important to try to maximize any interaction, and then also to communicate in this way. And what I've found is that in learning these skills, it allows for me to optimize my time, because I have such a faster filter for who I actually want to spend more time with and get closer to. So when you truly know what you care about, what you value, what the qualities are in people that you're connecting with, both, work and your personal life, that you really respect and value, then you're going to converse in a way that's going to help bring those things out so much faster. And then you'll know, ooh, okay, this is where I actually want to be more intentional and double down, because we don't have intimate time and infinite time and energy.
Yeah.
So that is really important. So the first thing that I always talk to people about is, and I actually have like a 6-month process for people that I take them through, of how to actually build the types of connections that you have in community. Most people don't take proactive action within it. So they kind of just let things pass them by, or they don't reach out, or they wait for people to come to them. And so that you end up then conversing or having a relationship with people that's out of convenience. And what you really find is that then you're not energized. So then you're dreading it, or you're resisting it. So that's why I love taking people through this whole process that allows for you to really think about, first and foremost, what are the qualities of people that you really care about? What are the qualities that you would desire yourself to even improve on? And then, like, where are those gaps? Because it's so amazing when you have relationships and friendships that you are really co-elevating within. And that's what I really, really love. So I recently led, a whole workshop on deepening your connection at the Yearn event, which was really going like much, much deeper into this whole process. And, just the stories that kind of emerge for people, it can happen really fast.
When you think of what you can accomplish in 6 months, right, there's probably so much. It's like almost like you're restructuring your life in a way, right? Like you're redesigning the life that you want to have and the people that you want to be in conversations with, who you want to deepen with. What I'm hearing is that there's almost like a filtering process. Like you learn what your filters are of like what kinds of experiences you want to call it in relationships, like learn, because maybe some people don't even know what that is yet, and that's where that convenience piece comes in. And then also like managing your energy in a way, and we talked a bit about managing your relationships. I'm also feeling like sort of managing energy in terms of starting to learn like what relationships and what conversations give me energy. What would you say to that? Like what are some ways that people can start to go about that process of figuring out the types of things that they do want to deepen, and not need to know exactly, but be in the exploratory phase possibly of it?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of layers, nuances to it. And, as I'm guiding someone through it, I am always taking them through some reflective journaling exercises, so that they're really tuning into things about when they have been with people that have energized them. What does that look like? What has energized them? What are the qualities that they've appreciated most? Like when they have felt most valued and seen, what are those moments? What are those times? So you're really kind of reflecting back on that. And then from there, you're thinking about, what do I love to talk about? Like, what are the things that really energize me and that are interesting to me? And you go through a whole process around that. And you're really outlining and defining what are those conversation topics that you love talking about, because it's going to help you then determine what are the ways that you might be asking questions around those things, so that you're in conversation, that you're better understanding, who someone is, what they care about, and do you align to those things? Because ultimately you're trying to discover, are you like-hearted, like-minded, in some ways, and appreciating people's differences and what their different experiences are.
Yeah.
So those are just like a couple of different things that I would take someone through in terms of the reflective process. And then it's a matter of actually going and starting to have those conversations and like seeing what you notice. Because, I've also, I've traveled the world and so, fortunate in these different places and spaces. And what I've seen as I've talked to people all over, it's always the common themes around what people feel seen around. And no matter what culture, no matter what subculture, and I've always kind of like taken all of these lessons and streamlined it down into then a certain type of conversation that then you can have with someone that's going to guarantee that it's going to unlock and move the relationship forward. And that's what sometimes being like comfortable with experimenting in conversation is all about.
Yeah. I appreciate actually even how you brought in the reflective piece of when have you felt seen in the past, or when has there been a time that you felt energized? Because I think even myself going through the process of thinking like, okay, now how am I going to go about deepening relationships? It's not all about like looking forward. You can look back and say like, what's gone well? What has lit me up? What gives me energy? And use that to create the experiences moving forward versus like starting complete blank canvas, right? Like finding those places.
Totally. It's so important to sometimes look back so that then you know what has served you and being open to then what's possible. So then when you're looking in the present, then you're really looking at, okay, well, what do I really desire now? Right? If let's say you're looking to really strengthen community and friendships, and that's important to you, like, and there's so much research behind that, data that shows that we have our most, fulfilling lives when we have at least, for women, 3 to 5 core friendships. There's also a lot of data that shows that for men after the age of 25, it's a lot more challenging for them to form new friendships. And they're most often just meeting people at work because that's like where they're spending a lot of time and it's more comfortable, but they're not being as proactive in other situations. And so it's actually harder for men to create friendships as they go through life. And so can lead to this epidemic of loneliness that we have. And it's so important to be proactive in like understanding, well, what do I actually really desire now? What is most important to me now? Who in my life do I actually want to get closer to? Who deserves more attention? Those are all questions you can be asking yourself. And from that place, then you start to look forward. And then it's about, okay, well, now how do I actually nurture that relationship in order to strengthen and deepen it as you look ahead? Yeah.
I love this. Okay. So let's say, our listener, hopefully everyone in your mind has a person, whether it's a strong relationship, whether it's a close relationship, or maybe it's like an acquaintance, like you have somebody in mind that that you want to develop a deeper relationship with. How might somebody go about that deepening with that person?
Yeah. So before maybe I share like the how, I think you'll glean a little, maybe even if I just share a little bit of an experience that I've had with my mom. And my mom and I, we've always had a loving relationship. And also, I think there was probably times that it was, had the tension that's natural. And what I realized at a certain point, probably particularly, also after my father passed and realizing, wow, life is short and you really have to make the most of the time that we have with those that you love. And there's probably times that there was more that I wanted to discover about my dad and his experiences in life. And so it was probably a pretty big catalyst for me in many different ways, stepping into my calling, but also more discovery around how you can communicate, differently and with more compassion and understanding. And so it really catalyzed me to start to get to know my mom on a different level. And there was this time that I really drove all the way, kind of cross country. And I showed up on her doorstep and it was a total surprise. And, she said she'd never felt more seen, loved, and connected all at once. And I took her on an adventure and we went out on the open road, and we were traveling all to these different places where she grew up. And these places that she'd also spent time with her parents, or that she even met my dad. And all these stories emerged. And what I learned was why she showed up the way that she did. As I was, an adolescent, as I was in college, as I was a young adult, and in an instant, all of my frustration turned into compassion.
Wow.
It was so powerful for me. And I learned these incredible, incredible facets of who she was, and things that I was so proud of. I was like, how come you've never told me this before? But I hadn't actually created this space to allow for her to share in a way that she felt safe. I would shut her down, or I would be fast in my response, or I would be short. And so I had to show up differently and actually have so much more curiosity. And through that experience, that's what I learned the most of now having the most gratitude that I have to have the deepest relationship that I ever thought was possible with her. I can truly call her my best friend. And what a gift to have in this lifetime. And I know that people have very different relationships with their parents, and everyone is different. And the lessons there can be translated to any relationship that you care about, whether it's a parent, whether it's a child, whether it's a friend, whether it's a partner, whether it's a business partner. It's all the same skills and all the same capability that we have to unlock. So the key is really thinking about who do I care the most that I want to deepen a relationship with? And then actually having a very specific conversation with them that I call the quality of relationship conversation. And through that, you can completely transform.
I feel a cross between shivers and emotional at the same time. Wow, that is so beautiful. I kind of just want to stay with that and unpack that story a little bit, because I think that's so special. And I think it's something a lot of people seek, whether it's with their mom or somebody else, right? And, I hear you sort of meant like suspending judgment is a big one. So I would love to unpack that a little, and also learn more about how you created, like I hear curiosity. You had to be curious in your mom, create the space for it. But there's something about, what drives us to sometimes be also short or like frustrated or shut things down with the people that we might actually want a close relationship with, but we're almost like an active co-creator in the opposite of that. So how did you shift that? And I don't want to make the assumption, but I'm assuming the suspending judgment has something to do with it. So I'd love to learn more about that. And then once you do shift that, how do you stay in it? Like,
Okay. Really beautiful question. And there's many layers to it. So I'll try to give you some of the biggest things that have impacted me in that. First, it's a choice. It's truly a choice. If you know that what matters to you most, and at the end of your life, what you're going to want to remember is the quality of your relationships, of your loved ones, then it's a choice how you show up every day, and catching yourself and being, reactive, and actually choosing to lead with love and connection. Second is that we do have a lot of different things that are competing for our attention, and that there's natural stressors of life. And so for me, I really cultivated practices that allow for me to be more present in any moment. And that has been completely transformative, because it allows for me to actually slow down from all the go and show up with way more patience. So one of the biggest transformational experiences that I did was walking the Camino de Santiago, and it transformed my ability to be present in any moment and also in any interaction, which is why I'm so excited to actually be guiding a group soon enough as we're talking. But when we do tune into that, it helps us move from the reaction and the tension to the connection. And so those two things are very big in how you can show up differently, a choice, and whatever practices are mindful for you to slow down, take a breath before you go into a conversation, and just be more present with that person, which is the greatest gift you can give someone. It's going to make a big impact.
Yeah, I want to actually unpack, even now zoom in on that a little bit, because it does make such a difference. I notice for myself, like if I'm overstimulated and I'm having a conversation with someone, that even if I do truly care and I'm trying to be intentional, if I feel like I'm not present, it doesn't feel as engaging. And the other person can tell. Like Sam will often say, you're not really like listening, you don't want to be and I can get defensive because I genuinely do want to be in that conversation, but he has a point. Like, yeah, I'm not really present. And so I'm curious, you mentioned your trip, and I'm curious, like, what happened on that trip that allowed you to learn presence? Like, what was your journey with learning presence and how you brought that into your day-to-day life? Because I want to sort of like tease out how we can all do that, whether it's like a big trip or a hike or whatever it is, how we can begin to have that experience to ground our presence in conversations, in work, in whatever we do, whatever we show up to. Because we are in a society that feels like it's very overstimulating, especially if you're in a big city.
Mm-hmm.
And I always find I'm most present when I'm like out in the middle of nowhere in nature. But that's not realistic to do every single day, right? So, and you're so good at it. So I would love to hear like how you brought some of that back into the city life, work life.
Well, just even what you said is very much what happened for me. It was about quieting the noise and the stimulation. And, my guide at the time, who is now my collaborator, who became a dear friend, it, really taught me like, turn off the noise for a bit, right? And it is like, as much as we love learning and these mediums are so powerful for our learning, sometimes it's important to actually be comfortable in the silence. So now every single day I take a piece of that Camino into my day-to-day. I go on all walks every single day where I am not listening, to anything. I'm really just pausing and noticing what is bringing me awe. And then I'm thinking and reflecting, what is elevating my energy? What elevated my energy today? What drained my energy? What do I want to tweak for tomorrow? And I do this every single day. And anyone can do this at any time. This could be a 10-minute walk that you take, or a 10-minute break wherever you are. Of course, being in nature, going to a park, whatever, putting your feet in the earth is beyond powerful, but sometimes it can just be, in your own home. And if you do those micro things, it really, really does make an impact. And so for me, what you were saying around, Sam might be asking you to like, connect and you're like in the midst of something. So what I learned in the application of that was, I used to do the same thing, with someone that I loved, and I'd be on my phone and I'd be frustrated. Like, what do you mean? I just have to check this. I'm like, and instead it's like, if it was urgent, then I would just communicate around that. And I would say, I totally want to connect with you. And that is really important to me. And is it urgent? And if they said, no, great. Can I just complete this? It will take me 5 minutes and then I'm here with you. Or I would say to myself, maybe this isn't very important. And I would just turn my phone over and I'd put it down and I'd say, I'm here. Because I realized that at the end of the day, what he was really asking for was not necessarily like, get off your phone and was frustrated. It was like, he just wanted to connect. He wanted to deepen that connection. And so that's what I wanted too. Like, I wanted that connection too. So I was holding myself back from actually what I truly desired most in life.
Wow. I'm actually thinking like, okay, so now even bringing it back to your mom, right? With that powerful realization of the bids for connection. I've heard this term. I think there's a school of thought where that comes from, but it's escaping me right now. But bids for connection. Were there moments that you now look back and you realize your mom was like there were bids for connection there that were being dismissed? And how did you, through forming the deep relationship that you've now formed with her, what were some of the ways in which you healed that or built that deep relationship? And I'm assuming now those bids for connection don't go unnoticed, whereas before maybe they were being dismissed. But I'm curious, like, how can people sort of notice when those bids for connection are happening that we might not realize, right? Like the act of somebody being like, you're not listening or you're on your phone, like that's a bid for connection. Totally. They're not trying to annoy you, Totally. Even though it can feel annoying sometimes, but.
Yeah. So one maybe bid for connection that my mom always used to do with me was she would ask me to call her every Sunday. She did this ever since I was in college. And I used to do it, but I used to get very frustrated and be like, I'm in college. What do you want? Like, why do I have to call you every week? Right. Like that would be my reaction. And that's how I would express it. Right.
Yeah.
So it would cause even more disconnection. And when I took her on that trip and learned more about her, I actually learned that she was asking me that because my grandmother used to ask her that all the time. And I never knew this. I never knew this. And in that instance, as she's sharing that story with me, I'm recognizing, wow, that's where it came from. And then she had the awareness, because she's externally sharing the story and processing. She had the awareness herself to say, wow, that isn't actually from me. I was doing that because my mom had me do it. It was just an expectation. I couldn't question it. In my upbringing, you didn't question those things. You just did it. And so I thought that that's what it meant to feel connection. But what I've realized, what she shared with me after, was she's like, Lisa, I feel so much love and connection for you, and it can be in a different way. And it didn't have to be how I was taught to do it. And because she released it, and I had also greater understanding, then we found our own new ways of rituals and connection. So now I connect with her every single day because I desire to, but in my way that we've found, this is what works for us. So every day there's a 5-minute connection ritual, and I will either have a text or a voice memo or a video or a 5-minute phone call. And in that, we express what is something that you're grateful for, what is your intention for the day, and anything that you want to share as an update from the day before. And it's our moment, to do that, and the way that we're bidding for connection and leaning into that in a way that really works for us. Yeah. So anyone can do this with any loved one, where you're just asking them, what are the ways that they would love to connect? What would work for you and how you like to connect or communicate, and just cultivate your own little ritual. It can seem so simple, but it's beyond powerful. And she said to me that, those connection moments that we have are so meaningful to her, and has just feels so connected to me consistently. So, you got to cultivate what's right for you, but anyone can do it. Yeah.
Well, and I love that nuance of what's right for you and for the relationship, because it might be different for you and a friend, you and a partner. And so, and the fact that so much of what we do stems from tradition, or how we think it should be done, or just the way it's been done, right? Based on how we grew up, what our parents did and stuff like that. And so I love that there was something that sparked that conversation with you and your mom to realize that those bids for connection were actually not really based on maybe what felt true and authentic to the two of you, and seeing that how that transformed when you created something that was true for the two of you. What are some ways somebody can go about maybe building those rituals? Or I love that you have one where it's every morning, I think, the 5-minute connection with your mom. What are some ways, how did you get to that point of committing to that as the practice?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, it was noticing, what do I think would be in best service to her? And so you always want to think about the other person, first. And I started doing that at the way beginning of the pandemic, and noticing, she was more isolated, and I wanted to do something, since I was across the country, not near her, to be able to offer a connection, point. So, and do something that is uplifting, right? Because so often we're in conversation and people are going into the negative talk, and look, our life experiences are both the ebbs and the flows, the highs and the lows. And you can always converse in a way that's going to also help really kind of releasing that oxytocin and moving things into something that's more positive. So it really impacts our well-being. So that's
how you talk about something.
Yeah. So that's why I not only decided to do that particular ritual, but then why I framed it in the way that I did, with those types of intentions and questions. So that's one thing of how I got to mine. The other thing I'd say is there's really 3 things that people can do to connect better and to find things that work for them. One is these, connection rituals.
Mm-hmm.
The second is really the quality of time that you spend with someone in meaningful conversation, because it is not about the quantity of time that we spend. It's such a misconception.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the quality of time that you
Mm-hmm.
spend. And so really having the presence, now I spend, I've cultivated a lifestyle that I can spend a month at a time, with those that I love.
Yeah.
But to have really meaningful conversation where you're getting to better understand what their life experiences are that have shaped them,
Mm-hmm.
and not being afraid to ask those questions is super powerful. And the third is to have shared experience. Like I took my mom on that trip. When you have those shared experiences, more memories, more things get unlocked, and you're open in a way to also share more.
Mm-hmm.
So, fast forward is now I've also mentored people all around this and deepening connection, and have helped them think about those rituals, and then also the type of conversation they can have. One woman in particular really, really stands out to me right now in how she took the initiative to go and see her parents over a holiday period. She hadn't gone and visited them for 3 years. She really felt that, like her parents just didn't get her. Like
Mm-hmm.
they didn't get her lifestyle. They just didn't want to really connect underneath the surface, and, encouraged her to have this type of conversation where she could actually get curious about what they actually thought about their relationship. And, just asking, like, what do you feel about the quality of our relationship? How does it feel to you? What do you love?
Mm-hmm.
What do you wish was different?
Mm-hmm.
That is the quality of relationship conversation that you can have with that loved one. I mean, I'll just always remember how she shared, and she's like, I can't even tell you the magic that you brought into my life. And I have the closest relationship with my parents than they ever did.
Wow.
And I've heard that time and time again with friends that have become, best friends, with business partners that have transformed their relationships. Like there's so much. So, sometimes it's the micro moments that kind of keep you going. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's one initial conversation that then changes the trajectory of your relationship, and then you build from there.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, this is like a mic drop moment. If I had an extra mic, I would drop it. But yeah, there's so much there. I want to go in so many different directions. I'm so mind blown by the power of one conversation. And we've even had so many conversations that have shifted so many moments in my life and helping me get unstuck, because there's multiple things, right? I think on one hand, we get in our own heads, there's projections about our assumptions of other people, how they might be thinking of us or responding to us. And then there's also, deciding that intentionality of it. Like, who do you want to build deeper relationships with? Discovering what that is. And that can often be really challenging too. Like, I know for me, I struggle with my phone because I love staying in touch with people and having relationships with people and being able to visit them, have them come visit me. Like we have that relationship. I love that. And I can find myself falling into habits of messages going unanswered, or feeling really guilty about not getting back to somebody. And I think my mindset on it is I've tried to transition to, I'm going to focus on the quality of the interactions, not the quantity. So if I can't respond right away, I can choose to say, okay, sorry, I'm so sorry, I don't have time to get to that today, but I'll get back to that another day. And I'm getting better at that. But I think where I'm going with this is oftentimes when it comes to shifting a relationship and then deepening it, there's a shift, like that initial conversation, and then deepening it. It can be hard to rebuild, and hard is my projection and assumption on it, but it can be hard to build something new with something that's not new, right? Like your relationship with your mom is not new, but you're building something new with her. People in relationships or marriages, that are rebuilding not rebuilding, but building something new with each other, built on a different foundation. You almost have to create a new foundation and then work up and down, because you're going deep, but also up and building new experiences. So is there anything that's coming up for you there? It's not a very formalized question, but I would love to hear what's coming up for you, and maybe support somebody in that, and then building that transitionary opportunity, and where to go from there.
Well, there's a lot that just came up for me, and I feel that I'd love to actually inquire a little bit more about what you shared before sharing some perspective. And Well, first, I just want to double click on really, really underscore that, you're being intentional with your time and you can only have so much capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you're also being respectful of the other person, that if you have a lot of messages that you can't respond to right away,
Mm-hmm.
that you're at least acknowledging that someone did reach out to you,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just being transparent with that person of what your priorities are. So you're showing care,
Mm-hmm.
and you're setting an expectation of when you will respond. That
Yeah.
is so important.
Mm-hmm.
So important. And most people fail to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They just fail. It slips their mind. It's, and what ends up happening is that people are all in the story of their head. That
Yeah.
person doesn't care. What are they thinking about me?
Yeah.
All these things happen, which is actually causing a disconnection. So I just want to
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge and appreciate you for really putting that into practice, because it's a small thing, but it is massive in terms of our ability to create really strong human connection. So
Yeah.
I love that you shared that. And then secondly, around, it feels hard sometimes to like kind of like build a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about that.
So family and friends, like I've traveled a lot over the years. I've built a lot of relationships. I've also changed quite a bit. Like I've evolved over the years quite a bit. And a lot of my friends, we've maintained relationships through that for the most part. I can't really think of anyone that I haven't sort of had a relationship with like through those moments. But I think what starts to happen is some friendships that I have for a long time, once you start to maybe show up different, and I think it's something around maybe managing expectations, because I really love what you shared about your mom, and that you sort of like had this almost like a contract in a way of like how you're gonna connect deeper.
Mm-hmm.
I can feel myself getting really defensive with friends, and even with Sam, when somebody's requesting something from me that I feel like it's really hard to give. So I think it's the people pleaser in me, like, because I get in my head a lot of, oh, I need to be doing more and more and more. I'm not a good enough daughter. I'm not a good enough friend. I'm not a good enough partner. Like, I feel like I'm always trying to do more. I think it really triggers in me oh, I'm not enough.
Mm-hmm.
When there's conversations around, okay, like how do we set up experiences for each other that allow us to blossom into this new version of our friendship, when maybe we are used to speaking every day or seeing each other more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Using those three things that you had mentioned, because I know one of them was shared experiences,
Mm-hmm.
the quality,
Mm-hmm.
and
Quality
then
the conversation and the connection rituals.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I love, and I think like it's figuring out those three things that work for each relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it can feel like a dance of trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's a part of me that gets defensive when it feels like something that I don't feel like I can like contribute to.
Mm-hmm.
And I've placed in the past a lot of pressure on the depth of relationships that I can almost maybe bypass the setting up and creating the safety for it, because I almost want to like skip other things. Like I don't want to have to I don't feel like I have it in me to like talk to somebody every day, or to have small talk, or to maybe go in like. And I guess another example with Sam is if either one of us is going into a conversation where we're like sharing so much about a certain topic, but we don't have the capacity to receive all that information in that time. Like it's like these can be, I think, moments that interrupt that deepening and forming those shared rituals and commitments to each other. And so I love those three things you mentioned, because I feel like we could sort of work through it through the lens of those three things. But I think, my challenge, back to your question, like my challenge has been figuring out what those new parameters look like when the old parameters are not working anymore. And we see that they're not working anymore, but it still feels like there's expectation maybe placed on those old parameters. That's not deepening connection. It's just creating more separation or conflict. And now it's like sort of actually moving away from that way of connecting to build something deeper and stronger. But there's growing pains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It sounds like there might be some specific relationships in your life that you have experienced this or are experiencing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels sometimes sticky.
Mm-hmm.
And so your question really underneath it is like, how do you navigate moving the relationship forward just in a different way? And so one more question before I respond is like, what would you really want?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would you want in this next generation
Mm-hmm.
of your friendship? Let's use that as the example.
Yeah. And I think I'm even thinking of this question through the lens of the three things to think about. Because I think one is creating shared experiences, even if it's like every other year, right? Like maybe the frequency isn't as often, creating those experiences, but in a new way on shared interests. Because I think the pattern where it's like if I'm in this like older version of myself, I end up not feeling good. And then it doesn't create like a good shared experience. And then that impacts the relationship. So there's definitely something about the future vision being new shared experiences that allow deeper conversations and maybe a deeper connection to ourself and each other in those scenarios. Like, you know, that can happen at like retreats or traveling or whatever it is. And then not feeling, and I don't like to focus on like what I don't want. So I need to try and frame it in what I do want, but not having either one of us feel, and this is something I've felt commonly when shifting relationships, not having either one of us feel like losing out or not getting enough through that. Looking at it as building quality versus quantity. And I've noticed that with my parents now, living away from my parents. And I still talk to my mom quite often, but I find not living in the same place, when we see each other and when we talk, it's so much better. Like it's so much deeper. It feels like we're friends. I'll go to my mom for advice. I'll go to my mom to just like talk. Whereas before, I would get frustrated because our relationship was built on a past version of myself and herself. Like it was built on a past version of our relationship. So there was growing pains. And then B, I think something shifted where there was like a different form of maybe respect and honor for one another. And I don't know what caused that, but part of me feels like it was actually moving away. I don't know. And having like a little bit of that separation. But yeah, I guess to summarize is creating really awesome shared experiences together and having a cadence where it never feels like it's coming from scarcity of like, oh, I got to do this.
Thank you for sharing everything just openly and honestly and vulnerably. And the desires that you have to maintain friendships in a different way with maybe without guilt of certain expectations. And so there's, a lot of layers to, how you can continue to cultivate that. But some of that is really first and foremost, like, that's why I was inquiring to, like, you got to be clear on what you really, really desire, what you truly desire and what that looks like in friendship. Also knowing that it's okay that the nature of friendships evolve. It's okay. It's natural. We're not going to have the same level of connection throughout our whole lives. And at different phases, we're evolving. And so your desires are also shifting in what you appreciate about how you spend your time and in what way. And you love having, rich conversations that are about what you're growing in and learning from others. And, that's important to you as a value set. And so you want to find the quality times that enable that while also enjoying, the play. And that's so important too. Like, our relationships are about both the depth and the play. And so the key is really, continuing to be intentional about, like, I do this, like, we have an annual college girls trip, like, we live very, very different lives, but there's a sisterhood and there will always be friends for the rest of our lives. And we're very, intentional about still making that time in order to go on a trip and have that shared experience each year. I also was feeling like I wanted a little bit more. Like I felt a level of disconnection to not just be waiting, a year out till we saw each other. So I shared openly how I was feeling. And I shared with some of them, like, I feel a little disconnected. Like, how do you feel? What would you maybe desire in the level of our frequency of connecting? And I just openly had that conversation, and it inspired now leading virtual connects where we have them once a month. And it feels really good to be able to connect in those ways where we can talk about what is going on in our lives and stay more connected. So it is about a collaborative negotiation. And what I've learned in studying nonviolent communication and conscious communication is you have to phrase it in a way that someone is going to be open to hearing and through that place of expressing your needs very openly, very honestly, very calmly, and then trying to understand what theirs are, then from that place, meeting each other in a way that feels good for both parties. It's not about one person being right. It's not about one person getting their way. If you are trying to aim at that being the goal, you'll never form the strong connection that's able to be nurtured and maintained. So the more that you then lean into observing what's going on in your own mind, what your feelings are, what your emotions are, what you actually need, and then making a request, and then seeing what their request is and how it lands, that's how you can kind of get to that place. And
like finding that place in the middle too. Like it's a co-creation versus a compromise. It's not about like figuring out how can I compromise and how can you compromise, because that doesn't necessarily lead to like energy.
Exactly. It's the same thing with your partnership, right?
Yeah.
And you know, if one person wants to like have a conversation or a certain, or is like really energy drained from like having the conversation, it's tuning into those nuances, recognizing that, leveling up your own emotional intelligence so you can feel that. And then from that place, you're like, oh, I can tell we need to continue this conversation, but maybe we just take a pause. Maybe that pause is 15 minutes. Can we come back to this in 15 minutes? That's my request. Or, hey, I need to like process what you've been sharing. Can we just take a break from this conversation and circle back tomorrow? But make sure you're clear that we're going to circle back, and let's find a time when that's going to work for both of us, and ask that very specifically versus it just lingering. And then the person's like, oh, they don't care about me, they're not going to circle back. Right. So that's what's also really important. And I've seen it in partnership as well, as I've, you know, fortunately, you know, mentored people within their partnership. And I've found that by learning the skills of compassionate communication and nonviolent communication, you know, people have told me like we've literally measured it. They've moved from like a 3 of satisfaction in their household to an 8 just in a matter of 3 months out of 10, because they have more peace in the household and they're actually expressing their needs and their emotions much more clearly. And that's where the depth really comes from.
Yeah. Wow. It's creating space for both and honoring both people. And yeah, I'm having a big insight right now, because it's not about going deep, isn't about both people being at the same place at the same time and being like willing to go deep. It's through the honoring of each other as well, and through the communication skills. Because oftentimes I know, like for myself with Sam, for example, I can feel myself get like internally frustrated if I want to maybe go deep and I can tell he's not in the headspace for it, and then vice versa. How do you actually access that? What are the tools, and probably in nonviolent communication, that can support the accessing of that depth, having the conversation versus just getting frustrated or shoving it under the rug? Like, you know, I feel like the tendency can just be like, okay, like whatever, like it's not going to happen right now. And like sort of like, and it's probably like a bit of an ego thing too, right? Where it's like, I tried, but that's not actually like the depth comes from pushing past that.
Yeah, but it's pushing past it in a way that's going to also allow for that person to calm their nervous system and not actually react that much more, that then there's like fire and fire, right?
Yeah.
So that's the skill, right? That's how nonviolent communication strategies also really help, so that then you're communicating in a way, and you know, this is very, you know, very much out there in the frameworks. And Marsha Rosenberg, the founder of nonviolent communication, is just, you know, an expert in this, and all, you know, and what he created it from, of all these very, very high stakes situations, and refugees, and like all these different high stakes situations, and then being able to bring it into your day-to-day life, whether in your business or in your home. Because if you are using you versus I, then you're going to have a much more defensive reaction. So very much using more I statements than you statements, and saying, I am feeling hurt. I am feeling disheartened. I am, versus like, you just did this and this, right? And you're going to have a very different reaction then. So when you do that, it allows for someone to say, I'm feeling this. I need to just like take a breath with you. Like, I would love to, you know, really talk about this. And it allows for someone to not feel attacked, so that then they can calm as well if they're in a more heightened emotional state. And then from there, you're going to have a much more smooth dialogue to move the relationship forward. Yeah.
Wow, it's so fun. When you think about having like building deeper relationships, I don't think my mind doesn't go to being able to have difficult conversations. But that's actually like, that's such a key factor.
It's such a key factor. I mean, because it's all interconnected, right? Of course, there's the type of conversations that just unlock constant depth and intimacy. And I love, I love those, you know, and those are the things you're like really getting the juice of, like what someone is experiencing, what they're challenged by, what they have learned from something. And, you know, when you stay with someone and inquire the next level deeper, you know, of why something was important to them, what they just learned from it, like you're going to increase such levels of depth, right? And then there's sometimes the tension that arises, and you have to know how to navigate both the pleasure conversations and the challenging and sometimes painful conversations. That's the masterful skills of being, you know, an exceptional conversationalist and communicator. Absolutely. Yeah. And I know that in, you know, a simple example too, even that has happened, you know, with I love when you can turn the tables and also teach your mom, teach your parents, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, we were having a conversation recently about even just in a social situation and in a situation where she wanted to be able to connect with people, but she and was there with someone that she cares about, but she didn't really like feel that she could connect with what people were saying. And they were oftentimes talking about other past stories. Like oftentimes we're always like around people that know each other very, very well. And they're talking about all these stories of times that they were together. And it's hard for like new people to kind of relate to it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, she calls me from the bathroom and I'm like, okay, this is what you do. Right. And so staying with it, going back in and actually reframing, like expressing, you know, I would love to learn a little bit more about your experiences. I'm having sometimes a little bit hard of a time tracking because I wasn't there. But what I would love to understand is, what did you learn most from that time that you were together? And so she framed the question in that way. She first expressed how she felt, why she was asking a question. She's expressing her intent. She wanted to feel a deeper connection to them. And then she prompted the question in a way that is a much more level of depth underneath the surface than just what happened in memories, but what they learned from it. And that is how she shifted the dialogue. She said they talked about that topic for the next hour. It was fascinating. She learned so much. She found it so interesting, and they all increased their level of depth.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's such a shift, especially because you see that a lot in even organizations or teams, right? Like where when you have shared experiences and then other people can feel left out, but to either share the experiences in a way that allows everyone to get an experience from it, or be the one that's asking the questions to elicit those responses, and that dynamic is so powerful, such a powerful shift. And even in conversations where, you know, there's a group of friends or family talking about old stories, like it's just such a shift that now includes everyone in the dialogue.
Definitely. I mean, it's really important that you bring up the professional side, because we've been talking a lot about the personal, and, you know, I work with a lot of founders and leaders and also young professionals, and being able to shift this where you're then so much more curious about your colleagues and coworkers and better understand them. Like you're learning through the process of a team building experience, you're learning also the skills of it. And they always move the relationship forward. I always hear teams saying, oh my gosh, we have the greatest energy. We're so much more engaged. We're so much more collaborative. We actually are more comfortable using our voice so that they have, you know, stronger ideas and they move the business forward with strategy. So I always hear that. And what I also hear is from a business partnership perspective, like a private client of mine was just sharing this the other day, and she's an incredible founder. And she also was having experience with her business partner of, you know, some tension that was arising, and emotions high in a meeting. And she's like, it's not moving forward, like the way that she went forward. Yeah. And she caught herself, put into practice what she's been learning. And she just slowed down, and she's like, I think I need a minute. I think I need a pause. And we had the conversation. I asked her, I'm like, she was really putting the blame on him. Like he wasn't doing this. And I was like, what is it that you really are feeling? What do you really desire? And when she slowed down, she realized so much of the energy that she was bringing into that conversation was actually what she was carrying from home, and tension that was happening of family situations that were coming up that were causing a very high stress. And that is why she was also feeling that much more triggered in work. And what she actually really wanted, she was able to fully tune in. And then the next day she went back, she told him, this was actually like, I was experiencing something personally. This is also what I was feeling. This is what I would desire. This is what I would need. And what they were able to get to by her expressing that vulnerably was it completely changed the dynamic between them.
Wow.
They totally solved what they were trying to on the business front. And it also deepened their business relationship because they could better understand each other. And so often we think work is separate from personal, but it's all interconnected. So when you're learning to actually show up better within your personal life, it's going to have a dramatic impact in your work life. And if you are having the courage to be a little bit open and vulnerable too, with certain boundaries, you don't have to share everything that's going on. It can be such a huge catalyst for actually deepening your connections with work too.
Totally. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I completely agree. And that's such a powerful, because like everything you've shared so far can be used in the work. It can be used with family, with friends. Like it's all relative, and they can be used in their specific context. And at the same time, they're also interconnected. They also have a direct impact on other areas. Something going on with family is going to impact how you show up at work. And so there's a level of depth that I hear in the relationship, and then a level of depth and understanding in yourself to really understand what's going on for you. And so, yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for all the stories you've shared. I feel like I've learned more about you, about your work, about the process, about myself.
Isn't that what's so great about conversation? Like you learn so much more about yourself in the process as you do have conversations that inspire more growth and openness, and also you feel more connected. So yeah.
Well, thank you. This has been a gift for me. And I know we're coming up, I'm sure we've talked way over the time that we thought we were going to talk, which is only natural. But is there anything that you didn't get to share that you wanted to leave the audience with?
I would just really encourage the audience to just take one nugget of what they felt most inspired by, and particularly really deepening the connection with someone that you care about. Who is one person in your life that you care about most? And what is a conversation that you could have with them this week? Finding a time, scheduling it, booking it, taking action to have that conversation. And, the nuances of how you have it, there's a lot of different, nuances to like how you actually have it. But the first step, is just committing to it and then asking to have it and moving the relationship forward.
Beautiful. Well, I have my commitment. So,
and what is that?
I
Can you
hope
share?
You all do too.
Are you open to sharing that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have two actually. I feel so. One is setting up time with my mom that's beyond just like our regular check-in, like having a more intentional conversation, because we talk pretty often and it's nice, but just like being more intentional with it and using some of the questions that we've talked about. And actually, you know what? I always overcommit and overdo it. I want to just stick with that one and be intentional about one a week, like choosing one conversation a week. This week, I'll focus on my mom.
I love that. Well, I look forward to hearing what transpires. I know it's a gift that you will give to her. And certainly, if you have any questions before you have the conversation, let me know.
You will hear from me.
Or anyone that's listening in the audience. If you have a question before you actually go and have these conversations, just, find me.
How can people stay in touch? What's a good way?
Yeah, you can message me on LinkedIn at Lisa Kalfus or Instagram at Lisa Kalfus. And I also love sharing great questions that you can also ask, or at firestartconnections.com. And you can always send me a message that way as well. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I'll share that all in the show notes as well. And thank you so much for sharing your time with me and everyone here today. I always learn something new from even just our casual conversations. So 10x that for a podcast or your connection hour. But I just, appreciate you very much. So thank you.
Yeah, I love being able to lead that and, leading people in those workshop experiences on how to deepen connection for different communities and organizations, and also just having the conversation. So thank you for inviting me to have a meaningful conversation. Always a pleasure connecting with you in these ways.
Thank you.
For all that you do to also inspire greater consciousness and get out of the conscious loop so that people can really move their relationships forward. It's so important. Thank you.
you. And maybe just a plug too for everyone listening. We'll share information in the show notes, but Lisa does amazing work with both organizations, teams, and individuals through group. There's just more, and there's more that you can continue to unlock and really unfold. So hopefully there's a way that people can get some more information about that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Always, I really, truly, truly love being able to empower people to become more masterful conversationalists, because that's where the richness of our connections are all formed. And certainly it opens up the doors to greater possibilities and abundance within our professional life and our personal life and beyond. So it's truly an honor. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Like what you heard and want more? Stay connected with our community on social media using the links below. Like us on your favorite podcast provider and sign up for the Conscious Loop newsletter, where we only send you goodies with one intent: to break your unconscious loops. If you have an unconscious loop you want to break free from, let us know so we can feature that loop on the show. Info and show notes, and we'll see you next time in the Conscious Loop.